I think he did that all in one breath. Now, if you joined us on Wednesday nights, you know that sometimes we slow down the video so that you can hear it. But recently, when I've tried to slow down videos, it sounds really warped. So I'll just encourage you to go online. Maybe I'll even post the link on our Facebook page so you can do it very slowly and you can hear what they're trying to say. But we are in the book of Job, and that was kind of the video that I wanted to show last week, but it goes as well with this week. And if you came in and I saw you before the service, I gave you a piece of white paper. It's blank. And if you do not have a paper, hopefully you can find something, or at least mentally in your mind write it down. But as we go through the first part of the message, I want you to write down one or two questions that you have for God about your life that you have not seen answers for. One or two questions that you have for God about your life as to why something happened. Because we're going to get here in just a minute, but we're going to tackle this idea of why God did blank happen. As I thought about this week, I'll give you at least one or two of mine. One of mine is why, God, did I grow up in a single-parent home? I loved sports. I mean, I still love sports. But I would have loved to have done something with my dad that was sports-related, whether it's going to sporting events, having him watch me play sporting events, whether he would help me do better in sporting events, or just to be there. And so that would be one of my questions. Do I have an answer? I have speculation, but I don't have an answer. So, questions like that you don't have answers for. Because we're going to come back to that at the end of the message. While you're thinking about that, hopefully you can do two things at once. We're going to go real quickly over some review stuff from the first two chapters, because we're going to be in Job chapter 3 and so on for today. And we looked at in the first couple chapters, first of all, this idea that we all will experience suffering and loss. You know, I know that the video talked about how we want to question that, but the truth of the matter is we all are going to experience suffering and loss. And why is that? It's because it's God's design. It's God's design for our lives that we suffer, that we experience loss. And so as you think about the story of Job, he did experience suffering and loss, tremendous suffering and loss. But the other side of the coin, we talked about the fact, is that God is sovereign over everything. He is in control. He has authority over everything. We actually spent a whole message going through all the things that he is sovereign over. So he is sovereign over everything, and that's something that we are going to expand upon as we move through the book of Job. And so we left off last week with Job and his wife and their discussion, and how his wife in verse 10, chapter 2, told him to curse God and die, and then he replies in verse 10, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So these are two remarkable statements in this verse, that he is trusting God no matter what, whether it's good or whether it's bad. And so it's not just difficult for Job, and again, the more I read and the more I think through, to cut his wife some slack as well, because she lost everything. She lost all her children, all her riches. She also lost the health of her husband. And so they are experiencing not just the loss of those things at that time in their lives, but from that time forward. So you think about the days and the weeks and the months and the years that would pass for Job and his wife to deal with that loss. And so I'm sure that they were sitting down and talking, and they were coming up with their God, why did this happen question. God, why did you take everything from us? God, why did you give these sores to me? Why are you allowing this to happen? And so as we progress through this morning, as we think about this question, and hopefully either you wrote something down or you've got something in your mind as to, God, why did blank happen? We're going to give us two things to kind of anchor us for when those times come. Two things where we can say, God, when these things happen, when we ask this question, we have answers to go to. Now, they may not be the answers to the question, but they will be answers to help us navigate our lives. And so if you continue in chapter 2, verse 11, this is where it goes. It says, when Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes, and they sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word because they saw how great his suffering was. So imagine that. You've got your friends, your closest friends that show up. They see you, and they tear their robes. They sprinkle ashes, and they sit with you for 7 days and don't say a word. That's how bad Job looked. And so then Job begins to speak, and it begins this cycle throughout the book of Job where he speaks, and then one of his friends speaks, and then he responds, and then they speak, and it happens 3 different times. Eliphaz first, then Bildad, then Zophar, and then eventually at the end, a 4th friend, Elihu, comes in. But the thing that we notice about Job's friends is that the advice that they give their friend is very unhelpful. Not only is it unhelpful, it's not really true for his situation. Because just because something is in the Bible doesn't mean it's an example for us to follow. Just because something is in the Bible doesn't mean it's an example for us to follow. And so God gives us examples to follow, but there are some things in the Bible that we shouldn't follow. And so his friends that are giving this advice, it may be true, but the way they apply that truth is false. Their timing or their tone of their advice may be unhelpful. And even some of the things they say are just not true. Because all of them believe Job did something wrong to merit what happened to him. They all believe Job sinned or did something to God that caused all the calamity to come on him. They did not have an answer for innocent suffering. They did not have a box to put it in and understand it. Because they believed that if something bad happened to you, you deserved it. If something good happened to you, you deserved it. Now, I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but I'm sure at some point in your life or in my life, we would think that is true. That good things are happening to that person because they did something good, and bad things are happening to that person because they did something bad. And the truth of the matter is, that is horrible theology. The Bible doesn't really talk about that in that way. And so, we're going to look at some anchors that we can hold on to, some truths that we can hold on to help us through these times of uncertainty and questioning when we're experiencing suffering and loss. Now, I'd love to read Job chapter 3 in its entirety, but I'm going to give you homework and have you read it on your own this week. Not only that, but I want you to circle the word why every time you come across it in chapter 3. Because if you were to do that, you would find the word why 6 times. 6 different times in the book, chapter 3 of Job, he asks why. And the first one, he basically asks this question: why was I even born? Why was I even born? If this is what I'm going to experience, God, why did you create me? Why did you put me here on this earth to go through that? Why am I even here? Because he then draws the conclusion as to, if this is why I'm born and this is what I'm going to experience, I don't want to be here. I don't want to live. I just want to die. And yet, as you and I read through the book of Job, we're going to see not only is he honest about his faith and he's honest about his life, but he comes to grips with what God is doing and allowing. And so, as I said, there's going to be two anchors that we hold on to. Two, and the first one is, no matter what happens in life, remember that God is all wise. No matter what happens in life, God is all wise. And I would even add to the end of that, and you are not. Or, and I am not. God is all wise and I am not. Because when you look at your life, you look at my life, you look at Job's life, it's very easy to ask why. But we don't see the full picture. If you go to Job chapter 28, it's considered the central scene in the book of Job. And as we get there, he is asking why. And he begins to write some words that really show why the book of Job is in. Here we go. Thought it was my stomach. Just kidding. In Job chapter 28, verse 12, it says this. He says, "But where can wisdom be found? Where does understanding dwell? No mortal comprehends its worth. It cannot be found in the land of the living." And so Job is saying he can't find it. Only God knows where the wisdom is. He's searching for it. He knows it's more important than silver or gold or precious metals. And then you skip down to verse 20. It says, "Where then does wisdom come from? Where does understanding dwell? It's hidden from the eyes of every living thing, concealed even from the birds in the sky. Destruction and death say, only a rumor of it has reached our ears." Again, speaking of wisdom, God understands the way to it, and he alone knows where it dwells. For he views the ends of the earth, and sees everything under the heavens. When he established the force of wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm, then he looked at wisdom and appraised it. He confirmed it and tested it. And he said to the human race, "The fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding." Now that verse is a whole lot like Proverbs 1:7 and Proverbs 9:10. So that's where we get this idea that Job is a book of wisdom. And so Job is searching for it. And so when we get to these verses like 23 and 24 and 25, we see what wisdom is, and we can see that wisdom involves knowledge. Wisdom involves knowledge. Verse 23, God understands the way to it. He alone knows where it dwells. So if you're going to be wise, if I'm going to be wise, we have to know some things. But not only is it knowledge, it's also perspective. It involves perspective. Verse 24, "For he views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens." God is outside of time and can see everything. With wisdom, you need to be able to perceive and know. But also, it involves experience. Verses 25 and 26, "When he established the force of the wind and measured out the waters, when he made a decree for the rain and a path for the thunderstorm." God is the one who invented, who created wisdom. And so when you look at knowledge and perspective and experience, and you think about yourself and I think about myself, we come up woefully short. We lack experience, perspective, and knowledge. Think about it. We lack knowledge. We don't know everything that God knows. We don't know everything other people know. How many times have you said to yourself, man, if I knew beforehand that I shouldn't do that, I wouldn't have done it. That's what we lack. We lack knowledge. If we would have known what would have happened, we would have said, well, I'm not going to do that. But we still do it because we don't have the knowledge of it. We also lack perspective, because when you think about our perspective, whether it's yours or mine, it's either very limited because of what we can see and know, it's jaded because of our past experiences, distorted, or it's even wrong. Because sometimes we'll look at something and we'll say something and we're like, if I would have known that that person would have reacted that way because I said that thing, I wouldn't have said it. Perspective. But we also lack experience. The only way to get experience is to have experience. That used to get my goat for years. I'd interview for a job. Well, do you have any experience? Well, no, that's why I'm applying for the job. I want to get the job to have experience. But you need experience. Well, I can't get experience unless I get the job. And there's just like this circle that happened. And so we lack knowledge, we lack perspective, we lack experience, which means we lack wisdom. And so that's why we need to search for it, find it, acquire it, pray for it. Because when you turn the page and you think, okay, well, if we lack knowledge, perspective, and experience, God doesn't. God has complete understanding. He has complete wisdom. He has complete knowledge, complete, perfect perspective. He has all the facts. God's never surprised by what's going on. He's not like, oh, I didn't know Ray was going to do that. No, he knows. God has an eternal perspective on everything. Verse 24 even talks about that. He views the ends of the earth and sees everything under the heavens. Everything, all things actual and possible. He has infinite experience. He's the one who created wisdom. He is the one that spoke and the world was created. He's experienced everything, which means he is perfectly wise, which translates into everything that goes on in our lives. He knows and understands what's going on. And so amidst of our questions, when you look at that piece of paper or you think about the question or two that you came up with, why, God, did this happen? We have to remember we're not all wise, but God is. That's why in the middle we can say, you know what? God, we trust you. But you may be sitting there and saying, well, how can I trust God? How can I trust God with my life? Or how can I trust God in this situation? Or how can I believe that what's going on is a part of his plan? But if we fall back and remember that his knowledge is perfect, he knows all things. When we remember his perspective is eternal, like the video said, and the Bible says that our sufferings in this life are but a blip on the screen of the glories that we will receive in heaven. And he's got infinite experience. He knows all things because he has experienced all things. So whatever you're going through, whatever you've gone through, whatever you're going to go through, we can trust God because he is all wise. Think back to the gospel story. The Easter story. Jesus lived a perfect life and he was an innocent man sentenced to death. Even Jesus had a why question. Remember in Matthew 27, he said what? 3 in the afternoon, he cried out in a loud voice in Aramaic, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Even in his humanity, he cried out, why? Why was I having to do this? And yet as we look at Scripture, as we seek to understand what God was doing, it was God in his limitless wisdom saying, this is how I was going to pay for sin. This is how I could take care of sin in the past and the present and the future. And so that when we see that and we trust in that and we believe in that alone for our salvation, we can be forgiven of our sin and experience heaven. He is infinitely wise, and we are not. Now, there's a second anchor, and this is the one that I think is also kind of hard, is that no matter what happens in this life, we need to cling to God as our hope. We need to grasp hold. We need to hold on to. Because it's one thing to know in our head God is all wise. It's another thing in our heart and our life to live it out and live a life of hope. If you go back to Job chapter 3, you can feel the despair of Job. Why? Why, God, am I even born? Why are you putting me through this? Why did you take everything from me? And if you were to go through different portions of the book, we'd see Job chapter 6. Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant what I hope for. Job wants hope. That God would be willing to crush me, to let loose his hand and cut off my life. Job does not want to live. Job 7, I despise my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone. My days have no meaning. Job 10, are not my days almost over? Turn away from me so I can have a moment's joy before I go to the place of no return, to the land of gloom and utter darkness, to the land of deepest night, of utter darkness and disorder, where even the light is like darkness. Job is hitting rock bottom. He does not want to live. He does not want to experience the pain anymore. The physical pain, the emotional pain, even the relational pain that he experienced. If you go to Job chapter 19, I'm just going to read that. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. He writes this in Job 19, he has alienated my family from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My relatives have gone away, and my closest friends have forgotten me. My guests and my female servants count me as a foreigner. They look on me as a stranger. I summon my servant, but he does not answer, though I beg him with my own mouth. My breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own family. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule me. All my intimate friends detest me. Those I love turned against me. I am nothing but skin and bones. I have escaped only by the skin of my teeth. Have pity on me, my friends. Have pity, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh? And so if Job chapter 19 just ended there, we would sense he is full of despair. You're wondering, okay, what is he going to do to end his life? Because he does not want to go through it anymore. But then verse 23, he says this. He almost like turns the page and he says, oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool or on lead or engraved in rock forever. And so what words does he want? Does he want to leave behind these words of despair, these words of hopelessness, these words of darkness? No. He wants to leave behind verse 25. I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. Job almost, if he could stand up, he would stand up and shout, I know my Redeemer lives. Now, did he get answers to the questions from before? No, he didn't. He doesn't know why, but he does know who. And that's why he says, I know my Redeemer lives. And at the last, he will stand upon the earth. Another way to translate it is vindicator. My vindicator lives. It's the same word used in Ruth to describe the champion of the oppressed. It's the same word used in Exodus for the deliverer of the captives. And in Proverbs, it's used to describe the defender of the weak. And so when you think about that more full picture of what that word is, Job is saying, I have a Redeemer who lives. And at the last, he will stand upon the earth, reminding himself and reminding all who read, this is not it. There is more. There is more after this life than this life. And so he goes on and he says in verse 26, and after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. Even though the pain that I'm enduring right now, eventually it will stop. But one day I will see God. And then verse 27 for emphasis, I myself, it's almost like me, myself, and I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. And how my heart yearns within me. That last phrase, how my heart yearns within me, can be summed up with one word: hope. Do you live with hope? Because the challenge for us today, whether you're old or young, whether you're going through something, you just finished going through something, or you don't know you're going to go through something, no matter how hard or difficult it is, God is all wise, and we have to cling to God as our hope. Because when things are going on in your life, not only are you dealing with them, but others are watching. And so the question this morning is, do you live with hope? Do you live with a way that people look and say, I don't know how they're doing it? Because when they come up to you and they ask you, you can say, you know what? I'm doing it because I know my Redeemer lives. And one day, I will see him with my own eyes. And so, the stuff that goes on this earth is painful. It hurts. You feel like Job in Job 7 and 10 and even 19. But then you get to verse 25. And you stand up and you triumphantly say, I know my Redeemer lives. That's how you live with hope. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that it can be an anchor in times of difficulty. And Father, I know that in a place like this, people watching online, there are people that are going through tough things. There's suffering and loss going on. And so, Father, I pray for them. I pray that you would help them navigate this life with hope. That they would be able to say that you are all wise, that you are sovereign, and that they trust you. And Father, help all of us to live in such a way that our hope is seen by others and questioned by others, so that you can be honored and glorified. So we can talk about you and what you are doing in our lives amidst the pain and suffering. And so, Father, we give our lives to you and surrender to your sovereignty, rejoicing to know the truth that our Redeemer lives. And it's in his name I pray.